Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Be Like Christ for our Bible study through 2 Kings chapter 6. This chapter is interesting. There's some good parts, but also some very, very depressing, disturbing parts of this chapter. I got the hat on today. I was late filming this video because I went to breakfast with my wife, and my hair is a disaster. So that's why it's hat day today. The PDF is available out on the website, and as always, the first section of our PDF is our timeline. When did these events happen? The kingdoms of Israel and Judah divided about 975 BC. This is about 100 years after that, into the period known as the Divided Kingdom. These events in chapter 6 probably took place between 895 to 885 BC. Now we descend to our main character section. First up, Elisha. He's the prophet of God. We've been talking about him for quite a few chapters now. Then the sons of the prophets. This is a group of guys who seem to be students and at times servants of the prophets of God. They probably received some religious education from the prophets and also helped them with their work. We don't know a whole lot about this group of people, but they are mentioned several times in these last couple chapters. All right, hold on. Let me get a sip of Red Bull. The nectar of life will help me speak better. Okay. And then we have Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad is the king of Syria. We're also going to talk about the king of Israel in this chapter. Now, he's not named here, but this is almost certainly Jehoram, the son of wicked King Ahab. We're going to talk about an interesting way that God gives his people victory over the Syrians. Elisha is going to lead the army of Syria from the city of Dothan to Samaria. Ben-Hadad besieges the city of Samaria in this chapter, which was kind of the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. Now to page number 2, our first section in chapter 6 is a record of a miracle that was performed by Elisha. Elisha and the floating axe head, verses 1 through 7. So these sons of the prophets, they had a problem. Their living quarters were too small, and so they asked Elisha if they could go down to the Jordan River and cut timber to make new accommodations. He gave them permission, and they proceeded cutting down trees. Well, while they were chopping, one man was using an axe, and the axe head flew off of the handle and flew into the water. And he was really worried about this because he didn't own this axe. It had actually been borrowed from somebody else. So we're told that Elisha worked a miracle. He caused the iron axe head to float on the water, and the man was able to retrieve it. All right, section number 2, verses 8 through 23, the Syrian army is blinded by God. So the king of Syria made war with Israel, but Elisha, with God's help, kept revealing the plans of the enemies to the king of Israel, and Elisha was helping to thwart the Syrian attack. Their efforts weren't having any effect. When the king of Syria figured this out, he became really, really frustrated, and he actually sent an army to the city of Dothan just to capture Elisha so that he would stop giving away all of his secrets. Now, when Elisha's servant saw this army surrounding the city, he was worried, and he asked Elisha what they were going to do. And Elisha responds in a really interesting way. He says, "There are more people on our side than there are with the king of Syria." Now, Elisha wasn't talking about military strength. He wasn't talking about that he had a greater army than the king of Syria. Instead, he's talking about the power of heaven. God opened the eyes of Elisha's servant, and he saw that on the mountains around the city of Dothan, it was filled with chariots of fire. Spiritual power. Now, these chariots of fire weren't going to actually go and attack the Syrian army, but it was a display that God was all around them, right? That God was with them. God defeats the Syrians in another way. He struck them with blindness, and then Elisha tricked them by leading them away from the city of Dothan to the city of Samaria, the capital of Israel. And when they were inside Samaria, God opened their eyes again, and they realized that they were in a lot of trouble. Instead of killing them all, Elisha told the king of Israel to make a feast for them and to send them on their way. So the Syrians are defeated, but it's done in a way where bloodshed is avoided. Now in verses 24 through 33, we're going to skip forward a little bit in time, talk about the starvation in Samaria during the Syrian siege, and this is the disturbing part of the chapter. Sometime later, the Syrians, under the leadership of Ben-Hadad, attacked the city of Samaria again, and the siege led to a famine. And the famine was so bad that the text says that you could buy a donkey's head for 80 shekels of silver, which was a lot of money, right? And obviously a donkey's head isn't like choice meat. It's not exactly prime rib. and a quarter of a cob, that's about 1 liter, of dove dung or dove poop was sold for 5 shekels of silver because people were so desperate that's what they were eating. But the horror actually was much worse than people even eating dung poop to stay alive. People started eating people. And there's one story of this woman who came to the king, and the woman said, "Me and this other woman made an agreement that we were going to eat our children. We were going to eat my son yesterday, and we were supposed to eat her son today, but she hid her son, and now I can't find him, and so she's broken her deal." And so she wanted the king to do something about this. Now, I can't even imagine the reaction of the king when this woman comes with this complaint. The text says that he tore his clothes, and he ordered Elisha to be killed. It doesn't give us a lot of details as to why. Maybe he blamed him for this, or is because he knew that God's judgment was coming on this city and Elisha was God's man. But he orders Elisha to be killed. Elisha was in a house speaking with the elders of the city. The king sent a servant to Elisha's house, but Elisha isn't killed. In the next chapter, chapter 7, Elisha is going to prophesy an end to the starvation, and that end to the starvation is going to come very, very quickly. And so that is where we will pick up in our next study, Lord willing, tomorrow, 2 Kings 7. Now, for our application section, this chapter is the horrible fulfillment of a warning that God had given to his people centuries earlier. He warned his people that if they broke his laws, if they didn't obey him, if they didn't respect him, he prophesied that their enemies would make their life a horror. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Not only that, but the specific cannibalism that happens in this chapter is prophesied in Deuteronomy chapter 28, 54 through 57. Deuteronomy, that's way back during the days of Moses. We really need to keep this in mind because there's a lot of people who scoff at the idea that God's word, which was written 2,000 years ago, is still valid. They laugh at the idea that the promises and the threats that God makes in his word are still going to come true, that he's going to carry them out. Texts like this show us that God's warnings are to be taken seriously no matter what century we're living in. The world is never going to be around long enough for God's promises and his warnings to expire.